Julius Robert Oppenheimer became the architect of the nuclear age, shaping the destiny of humanity through discoveries that would reverberate for decades in international relations and the delicate balance of world power. His scientific and political trajectory illustrates how individual genius can irreversibly alter the course of history, setting precedents that defined the geopolitical tensions of the 20th century and inaugurated a new era of strategic terror. The American theoretical physicist never won the Nobel Prize, but his influence greatly surpassed those who received such a distinction as he led the development of the most devastating weapon ever conceived by the human mind. Under his technical and scientific direction, the most brilliant physicists of his generation concentrated efforts in Los Alamos to materialize the destructive power of the atom, simultaneously creating a tool for military victory and an instrument of global annihilation. The young Oppenheimer showed early signs of emotional instability that contrasted dramatically with his exceptional intellect. At the age of 21, during his studies at Cambridge, he placed an apple poisoned with toxic chemicals on the desk of his physics tutor, Patrick Blackett. This disturbing episode revealed the young scientist's deep frustrations with experimental work, an area in which he showed notable incompetence despite his brilliant theoretical capacity. Blackett, a rigorous experimentalist, constantly pressured Oppenheimer to improve his practical laboratory skills, demands that the student considered torturous and unnecessary. The academic environment at Cambridge emphasized experimental physics, an approach that did not suit Oppenheimer's temperament and natural aptitudes, generating a growing tension that would culminate in the attempted poisoning episode. Oppenheimer's early academic life was characterized by emotional extremes and difficulties in adaptation that almost resulted in severe legal consequences. In Joseph John Thomson's underground laboratory, he spent frustrating hours trying to produce thin beryllium films used in the study of electrons, a task in which he demonstrated a disconcerting lack of manual skill. His clumsy experimental technique contrasted sharply with his ability to absorb complex theoretical concepts, creating a dissonance that deeply tormented him. During this troubled period in 1925, Oppenheimer began to be fascinated by the emerging mysteries of quantum mechanics, a revolutionary field that promised to completely reshape human understanding of the nature of physical reality. Surrounded by brilliant physicists like Ernest Rutherford and James Chadwick, he experienced a profound unhappiness that manifested in episodes of intense emotional distress, reaching the point of being found by friends rolling on his bedroom floor in evident psychological suffering. The attempted poisoning represented the peak of his emotional crisis, an incident that could have prematurely ended his scientific career before it even began. The specific details of the episode are lost to history, but there are conflicting accounts about whether Oppenheimer used cyanide or some laboratory chemical that would merely make Blackett ill. The seriousness of the situation became evident when Cambridge University authorities discovered what had happened, a situation that could have resulted in criminal charges and immediate expulsion. Fortunately for Oppenheimer, his parents were visiting him in the United States at that time, and Julius Oppenheimer, leveraging the family's financial influence, managed to convince the university authorities not to criminally prosecute his son. The family wealth proved decisive in avoiding more severe consequences, resulting only in the requirement that Oppenheimer attend periodic psychiatric counseling sessions in London as a condition for remaining at the university. The summer of 1926 marked a radical transformation in Oppenheimer's academic and emotional life, when he transferred to the University of Göttingen, an intellectual environment that would prove ideal for the development of his scientific potential. The department was headed by Max Born, a visionary physicist who had coined the term quantum mechanics only 2 years earlier, and who stood out as a gentle and reflective mentor. Born had guided the work of some of the century's most important physicists, including Werner Heisenberg, Wolfgang Pauli, Enrico Fermi, and Eugene Wigner, effectively constituting the world elite of the new quantum physics. The class Oppenheimer joined was extraordinarily talented, including luminaries like Paul Dirac and John von Neumann, a stimulating environment that contrasted dramatically with the experimental culture of Cambridge. Göttingen emphasized theoretical physics, an area in which Oppenheimer could finally demonstrate his true intellectual capabilities. Under the guidance of Max Born, Oppenheimer experienced a notable improvement in his mental health and finally found a community of people equally obsessed with theoretical physics. In a letter dated November 14, 1926, addressed to his younger brother Frank, he wrote enthusiastically about how he found the work challenging and almost pleasurable, a clear demonstration of his personal transformation. Oppenheimer was thriving academically, and his exceptional talent was beginning to be recognized by colleagues and professors. Born would later describe Oppenheimer as a man of great talent who was conscious of his superiority in a sometimes awkward and problematic way, an observation that suggested both the exceptional abilities and the complex personality of the young physicist. At 23, Oppenheimer completed his doctorate in physics, writing his thesis in German on the quantum theory of continuous spectra, a work that demonstrated his growing mastery of the new physics. During his 2 years in Göttingen, Oppenheimer published more than a dozen scientific articles, many of which expanded the pioneering work of Werner Heisenberg, a physicist only 3 years his senior. The two eventually met in 1927, the same year Heisenberg published his revolutionary paper on the quantum uncertainty principle, a fundamental discovery that would forever alter the scientific understanding of physical reality. By all available accounts, the pair developed a cordial and respectful relationship, sharing deep scientific interests and similar theoretical perspectives. At that historical moment, it would be impossible to predict that only 15 years later they would become mortal rivals in a scientific and military race of epic proportions, competing to develop the first nuclear bomb in history. Oppenheimer would represent the scientific and military interests of the United States, while Heisenberg would work for Nazi Germany, transforming an academic friendship into a geopolitical rivalry that would define the fate of World War II and lay the foundations for the future Cold War. At that time, the international scientific community considered it practically impossible to extract significant amounts of energy from radioactive atoms through controlled processes. Since the discovery of radioactivity by Henri Becquerel, Marie Curie, and Pierre Curie in the late 1890s, it was understood that radioactivity constituted a passive and random process. Unstable atoms decayed at unpredictable moments, seemingly without possibility of external control or manipulation, a limitation that seemed to make any energetic application of radioactivity impractical. In 1933, Ernest Rutherford, Oppenheimer's former supervisor at Cambridge, categorically declared that anyone hoping to extract energy from atomic transformations was talking scientific nonsense. In the same year, Albert Einstein stated that there was not the slightest indication that nuclear energy could be obtained, as this would require the atom to be voluntarily fragmented, a possibility that seemed to violate the fundamental principles of known physics. The central question lay in developing effective methods for fragmenting atomic nuclei in a controlled and productive manner. One theoretical approach involved accelerating protons through intense electric fields and directing them against target nuclei, a strategy that John Cockcroft and Ernest Walton successfully implemented in 1932. They accelerated protons against lithium nuclei, managing to fragment them and demonstrating the technical viability of artificial nuclear disintegration. This revolutionary discovery would later earn them the Nobel Prize, but it presented severe practical limitations that prevented viable energetic applications. Since protons have a positive electrical charge, they are repelled by all nuclei, which also have a positive charge, requiring extremely high voltages to overcome this electrostatic barrier. Cockcroft and Walton had to use 250,000 volts to accelerate the protons, and even so, only 1 in a billion protons could effectively hit and fragment a lithium nucleus, demonstrating the fundamental inefficiency of this method for practical energy generation. The discovery of the neutron in 1932 offered a revolutionary alternative that would completely transform the possibilities of nuclear physics. This subatomic particle, approximately 0.1% heavier than the proton, but without electrical charge, would not be repelled by atomic nuclei, offering a potentially more effective pathway for inducing nuclear reactions. In 1933, Leo Szilard began to contemplate the theoretical implications of neutrons for controlled nuclear disintegration, developing insights that would prove prophetic. Szilard realized that if an element could be found whose nuclei were fragmented by neutrons and which simultaneously emitted two neutrons upon absorbing a single neutron, such an element could sustain a nuclear chain reaction if assembled in a sufficiently large mass. This theoretical perception constituted the fundamental conceptual basis for the later development of nuclear weapons and energy reactors, although at that time no one knew if an element with these specific properties truly existed. On January 29, 1939, Luis Alvarez, a young and promising physicist, was getting a haircut while reading the San Francisco Chronicle when he suddenly abandoned the chair mid-cut and rushed to Oppenheimer's office. Alvarez had read an article about how two German chemists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, had managed to fragment a uranium atom by bombarding it with neutrons, a discovery that would fundamentally change scientific understanding of the possibilities of nuclear energy. Oppenheimer initially received the news with skepticism, declaring that such a process was impossible and proceeding to demonstrate mathematically on the blackboard why nuclear fission could never be achieved. His reaction illustrated how even the most brilliant physicists sometimes resist discoveries that challenge established paradigms, a tendency that would be quickly overcome as experimental evidence accumulated, confirming the reality of nuclear fission. This specific moment marked the beginning of the nuclear age, a period in which humanity discovered how to release the enormous energies contained in the atomic nucleus, knowledge that would soon be applied for both destructive and constructive purposes, establishing the scientific basis for the military and geopolitical developments that would define the following decades. The experimental confirmation of nuclear fission unleashed a scientific and military revolution that would radically transform international relations and the global balance of power. Lise Meitner and Otto Frisch, working with Hahn and Strassmann's data, provided the definitive theoretical explanation for the fission process, demonstrating that heavy nuclei like uranium could be divided into smaller fragments with the simultaneous release of enormous amounts of energy. This discovery confirmed Szilard's theoretical speculations about chain reactions and opened up possibilities for both peaceful and military applications of nuclear energy. Physicists around the world quickly grasped the monumental implications of these discoveries, realizing that humanity had discovered a new source of energy incomparably more powerful than any technology previously available. Oppenheimer, overcoming his initial skepticism, plunged deeply into the study of nuclear fission and its theoretical and practical implications. His exceptional capacity for theoretical physics soon established him as one of the world's leading authorities on nuclear processes, a position that would be crucial when the United States decided to develop atomic weapons. The international scientific environment became increasingly tense as the military implications of nuclear fission became evident, especially considering that German scientists had made the initial discovery and that Nazi Germany possessed both the technical capability and the political motivation to develop nuclear weapons. This realization propelled European and American physicists to urgently warn their governments about the need to initiate nuclear research programs to prevent Nazi Germany from gaining a decisive military advantage through the development of atomic bombs. Albert Einstein, although initially skeptical about practical applications of nuclear energy, was persuaded by Leo Szilard and other physicists to write a historic letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt in August 1939. This correspondence warned about the dangers of allowing Nazi Germany to develop nuclear weapons first, and recommended that the United States begin its own nuclear research program. Einstein's letter catalyzed American governmental interest in nuclear energy, although the full commitment of the United States to the development of atomic weapons only materialized after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The program that would eventually become known as the Manhattan Project began modestly, but quickly transformed into the largest scientific and industrial project in history up to that point, mobilizing human and material resources on an unprecedented scale to develop the atomic bomb before any enemy nation could do so. General Leslie Groves was assigned to lead the military and administrative aspects of the Manhattan Project. while the choice of the scientific director proved crucial to the success of the undertaking. Several options were considered, but Oppenheimer emerged as the ideal candidate, due to his unique combination of scientific brilliance, leadership capacity, and ability to coordinate exceptional and often difficult scientific personalities. His appointment as scientific director of Los Alamos represented a risky gamble, considering his relative youth and lack of administrative experience, but it proved to be an inspired decision that was fundamental to the project's success. Oppenheimer demonstrated exceptional leadership capabilities, managing to keep the most brilliant scientific egos of his generation united and directing them toward the common goal of developing nuclear weapons before Nazi Germany could do so. Los Alamos quickly transformed into the world's most concentrated and secret scientific center, bringing together elite physicists, chemists, engineers, and mathematicians in a coordinated effort to solve the colossal technical challenges involved in building atomic bombs. The secret laboratory in New Mexico became a unique scientific community where the brightest minds of the time worked under extreme pressure to develop technologies that had never been attempted before. Oppenheimer proved to be an inspiring leader, capable of motivating his team through a combination of personal charm, technical competence, and clear scientific vision. He understood both the technical aspects and the political and military implications of his work, realizing that the successful development of nuclear weapons would fundamentally alter the nature of warfare and international relations. The technical challenges faced at Los Alamos were monumental and required innovative solutions to problems that had never been addressed before. The team needed to resolve issues related to the production of fissile materials, design of explosive devices, detonation methods, and a multitude of engineering problems that arose as the project progressed. Two main bomb designs were developed simultaneously: the gun type, which used enriched uranium, and the implosion type, which used plutonium. The implosion design presented particularly complex technical challenges, requiring precise synchronization of conventional explosives to uniformly compress the plutonium core until it reached critical mass. These technical developments required coordination among multiple scientific disciplines and simultaneous advances in areas ranging from metallurgy to precision electronics. The atmosphere at Los Alamos was simultaneously one of military urgency and scientific excitement, as researchers realized they were participating in discoveries that would change history. Oppenheimer cultivated a stimulating intellectual environment where ideas could be debated freely, but always directed toward the practical goals of the project. He organized regular seminars where technical problems were discussed collectively, harnessing the collective wisdom of the most talented scientists of his generation. This collaborative approach proved essential for solving the multidisciplinary challenges involved in developing nuclear weapons, demonstrating how effective scientific leadership can dramatically accelerate technological innovation under conditions of extreme pressure. As the Manhattan Project advanced, ethical questions began to emerge among some scientists about the implications of the work they were doing. Oppenheimer was deeply aware of the moral dimensions of his work, but maintained focus on the immediate need to develop nuclear weapons before Nazi Germany could do so. He understood that the project's success could end the war more quickly, potentially saving lives by avoiding a costly invasion of Japan, but also realized he was creating a new category of weapon with unprecedented destructive potential. This tension between immediate military necessity and long-term ethical implications would characterize the rest of Oppenheimer's career and deeply influence his later political stances on arms control and nuclear proliferation. During the development of the bombs, a particularly unsettling scientific concern arose about the possibility that a nuclear explosion could start uncontrolled fusion reactions in the Earth's atmosphere. Edward Teller raised the theoretical hypothesis that extremely high temperatures generated by a fission explosion might be sufficient to initiate nuclear fusion in atmospheric nitrogen, potentially creating a chain reaction that would consume the Earth's entire atmosphere. Arthur Compton later reported that Oppenheimer shared these concerns, noting that the nitrogen in the air is also unstable, though to a lesser degree than other elements. The possibility that an atomic explosion in the atmosphere could trigger a global fusion reaction represented the most terrifying scenario possible. the complete destruction of all life on Earth through a single nuclear test. Although more detailed calculations eventually demonstrated that such a scenario was extremely unlikely, the mere possibility illustrated the magnitude of the risks involved in developing nuclear weapons. Most scientists quickly realized how improbable this catastrophic scenario was and continued with the project, but the thought of initiating fusion reactions with fission weapons would become very important after the war, when this theoretical possibility would be deliberately developed to create even more powerful hydrogen bombs. This initial concern about atmospheric fusion foreshadowed later developments in nuclear weapons technology and demonstrated how even the most brilliant physicists struggled to fully grasp the implications of their revolutionary discoveries. The Trinity test was scheduled for 4 in the morning, but was delayed due to a thunderstorm that threatened to compromise the scientific measurements and personnel safety. Finally, at 5:29 minutes and 21 seconds on the morning of July 16, 1945, the device nicknamed Gadget detonated in the New Mexico desert, becoming the first nuclear explosion in history. The high explosive compressed the plutonium core inward. The shockwave mixed beryllium and polonium, releasing a flood of neutrons, and the initiation system worked perfectly. The nuclear reaction had begun, and now there was no way to stop it, definitively demonstrating that the theoretical principles developed at Los Alamos could be translated into devastating physical reality. Only 6 kilograms of plutonium created an explosion equivalent to nearly 25,000 tons of dynamite, releasing energy on a scale that defied human comprehension. The mountains of New Mexico were illuminated more brightly than during the day. The shockwave was felt more than 160 kilometers away, and the mushroom cloud rose 12 kilometers into the sky. The heat was so intense that the desert sand melted, forming a vitreous mineral later called trinitite, permanent physical evidence of the fundamental transformation that had occurred. Fortunately, the explosion did not ignite the atmosphere, confirming that the scientific calculations about this catastrophic risk were correct. The success of the Trinity test unequivocally demonstrated that humanity had mastered nuclear forces and developed a new category of weapon with unparalleled destructive potential in history. On August 6, 1945, the Boeing B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped Little Boy, a gun-type nuclear bomb containing 64 kilograms of enriched uranium, on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The nitrocellulose ignited, pushing the uranium-235 slugs together and surpassing the critical mass needed to sustain a nuclear chain reaction. The explosion, equivalent to 15,000 tons of dynamite, killed nearly 70,000 people instantly, while another 70,000 would die from burns and radiation poisoning in the following months. 3 days later, an implosion-type bomb similar to the Trinity device was dropped on Nagasaki, killing approximately 80,000 additional people. More than 95% of the 225,000 people killed in the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were civilians, mostly women and children, demonstrating the indiscriminate and devastating power of nuclear weapons against urban populations. In 1965, recalling the moments after the Trinity test, Oppenheimer reported that he thought of a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, a sacred Hindu text he had studied extensively. He knew that the world would not be the same, noting that few people laughed, few cried, but most remained in contemplative silence. Oppenheimer remembered the specific line where Vishnu tries to persuade the prince that he must fulfill his duty, assuming his multi-armed form and declaring, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This quote perfectly captured the magnitude of the historical moment and the dark implications of what had been achieved, reflecting both the scientific triumph and the moral weight of nuclear weapons development. After the war, Oppenheimer became a national hero, with his portrait gracing the cover of Time magazine and his name becoming known in every American household. In 1947, he assumed the directorship of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, a prestigious position that recognized his stature as one of the most important scientists in the world. Simultaneously, he became chairman of the General Advisory Committee, where he served as an advisor on nuclear weapons issues to the American government. Oppenheimer used his influential position to argue in favor of arms control, realizing that the uncontrolled proliferation of nuclear weapons represented an existential threat to human civilization. In August 1949, the Soviet Union tested its first atomic weapon, fundamentally altering the global geopolitical balance and inaugurating the nuclear Cold War era. The American military establishment quickly decided that the best response would be to develop an even more powerful bomb, the hydrogen bomb, known as the Super. Oppenheimer opposed the development of the Super on ethical grounds and due to the concern that it would initiate an uncontrolled nuclear arms race. Despite his opposition, the Truman administration approved the project, and 3 years later, Ivy Mike, the first hydrogen bomb, was tested in the Marshall Islands. With a yield of 4 megatons of dynamite, it was 400 times more powerful than the Trinity test, demonstrating that the nuclear escalation had only just begun. A hydrogen bomb is effectively 3 bombs in one: a conventional explosive, a fission bomb, and a fusion bomb functioning in coordinated sequence. The conventional explosives trigger a fission reaction, which raises the temperature and pressure sufficiently to fuse deuterium and tritium, releasing enormous amounts of energy through nuclear fusion. In 1961, the Soviet Union tested the Tsar Bomba, the most powerful explosion ever detonated in human history. It was 5 times more powerful than Ivy Mike and approximately 2,000 times more powerful than Trinity, demonstrating that the arms race Oppenheimer had feared was developing exactly as he had predicted. This exponential escalation in the destructive power of nuclear weapons validated his earlier concerns about the long-term consequences of military nuclear development. Due in part to his opposition to the hydrogen bomb and his appeals to avoid a nuclear arms race, Oppenheimer was essentially tried to have his security clearance revoked, a process that would stain his reputation and effectively end his political influence. He had been subjected to surveillance during his work on the Manhattan Project, but this surveillance did not cease after his departure from the military project. Many of the wiretaps were illegal and warrantless, demonstrating how the American government was willing to violate constitutional rights to monitor even its own scientific heroes. Oppenheimer was questioned about his connections to the Communist Party, including his relationship with John Tatlock, a Communist Party member, during the period he led the Los Alamos laboratory. He was essentially accused of treason and espionage, allegations that reflected both the paranoias of the Cold War and the political ingratitude for the extraordinary services he had rendered to the country. In December 1953, Oppenheimer had his security clearance suspended, a moment symbolized when his face, now somber and in black and white, appeared again on the cover of Time magazine. His security hearings became international news, transforming the man who had led the development of the atomic bomb into a symbol of the contradictions and paranoias of the nuclear age. In 1964, the German playwright Heinrich Kippert wrote a play about Oppenheimer's life, a work that Oppenheimer so detested that he threatened to sue. Oppenheimer especially scorned the final scene where the character based on him recognized the evil of his work, declaring that they had been doing the devil's work. For Oppenheimer, the situation was always more complicated than simplistic narratives of good versus evil, reflecting the moral complexities inherent in developing revolutionary technologies during periods of global conflict. He maintained that it was probably always assumed at Los Alamos that, if the war did not end and could not be clearly concluded by diplomatic means, this weapon would play a decisive role. At the time, the alternative of an invasion campaign of Japan would certainly be much more terrible for everyone involved, a justification he considered valid despite the horrific humanitarian consequences of the atomic bombings. Oppenheimer believed that Hiroshima was much more costly in human lives and suffering than it needed to have been, to serve as an effective argument for ending the war, an admission that demonstrated his growing understanding of the moral dimensions of his scientific and political decisions. Although he recognized that it was easy to make such judgments retrospectively, he maintained that less destructive alternatives could have achieved the same military and political objectives. In 1965, when asked about recent proposals for talks with the Soviet Union to halt the proliferation of nuclear weapons, his response was categorical and revealing. It should have been done the day after Trinity. This statement encapsulated his regret about the failure to establish international controls over nuclear weapons immediately after demonstrating their technical viability. Later that same year, Oppenheimer was diagnosed with throat cancer, a likely consequence of his lifelong smoking habit, a vice that ironically would kill him after surviving the technical and political dangers of nuclear development. He died on February 18, 1967, at the age of 62, leaving a complex scientific and political legacy that would continue to influence debates about nuclear weapons, scientific responsibility, and national security policy. His death marked the end of an era in which individual scientists could exert direct influence over high-level military policy, a transition that reflected the growing bureaucratization and militarization of scientific research during the Cold War. Advances in science and technology have given humans tremendous power to make the world better or worse, and nuclear war is not the only concern we currently face. Climate change caused by human activity represents a serious threat to ecosystems and the most vulnerable people around the world, demonstrating how scientific discoveries can have long-term unintended consequences. Oppenheimer's legacy serves as a permanent reminder that scientific and technological progress must be accompanied by careful consideration of its ethical and social implications. The history of the Manhattan Project illustrates both the potential and the dangers of scientific knowledge, showing how fundamental discoveries can be applied for both the protection and the destruction of humanity. The third atomic bomb that was ready to be dropped on Japan was never used due to the Japanese surrender after Nagasaki, but its existence symbolized the industrial and scientific capacity that the United States had developed for mass production of nuclear weapons. This production capacity demonstrated that the nuclear age would not be limited to a few experimental weapons, but would represent a fundamental transformation in the nature of warfare and international relations. The Manhattan Project set precedents for governmental scientific mega-projects and demonstrated how national resources could be mobilized for specific technological objectives, a model that would later be replicated in programs like the space race. Oppenheimer's enduring influence extends far beyond his specific technical contributions to nuclear development, encompassing fundamental questions about the social responsibility of scientists and the role of technical expertise in public policy formulation. His trajectory illustrates the inherent tensions between national loyalty and universal ethical considerations, dilemmas that remain relevant as new technologies emerge with the potential to fundamentally transform human society. Oppenheimer's example serves as a case study on how exceptional individuals can influence the course of history through scientific contributions, but also on how political power can be used to marginalize scientific voices that challenge prevailing governmental policies.